Hello everyone, with an all-new Superman out in cinemas, I thought it was time to share my favorite Superman films. Now this will be my personal favorites, my personal ranking. It will greatly differ from yours, might even be controversial. In these times where everybody has a sense of tribalism with different Supermans, let's just remember that Superman has been everlasting because of the different incarnations. There's always going to be a different reinvention, reimagining of our great heroes, and Superman is included among those great heroes. He is the ultimate hero, and there's always going to be different versions of Superman at different times. Some you may like more than others. First of all, this will not include Steel or Supergirl, since they're Superman adjacent, but Superman's not in it, even though we do have Mark McClure as Jimmy Olsen in Supergirl. For honorable mentions would be the Kirk Alyn serials. Put in film form, but it's technically small serials. Starting off at my lowest is Justice League 2017, aka Justice League. This film was pretty much like the Super Friends, where Zack Snyder's was pretty much like Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. It's such a Frankenstein of a mess. You can actually spot the reshoots. Steppenwolf is lame in this version. The jokes do not land. They try to basically make it an MCU kind of Avengers film by getting Joss Whedon to fill in. Superman, while brighter, is still distracting with that CG mustache, and he just appears like a caricature of himself. That's just not the Henry Cavill tone. Even though he did harken back to that Boy Scout in blue. Batman, all the other characters are just made out to be a joke, and because of that, it's lower on my list. Superman, yeah, he gets stuff to do, but it's just not shown in the best light, and compared to the other version of this film, it falls short. But it was nice to get a nod to the Flash race at the end. In the wise words of Henry Cavill's Superman, I'm not impressed. Next up is Superman and the Mole Men. Wow, what a film for DC's first film and the first appearance of George Reeves with Phyllis Coates as Lois Lane. You know, I like the allegories here. Yeah, this was low budget, but the flight sequences, or should I say the jumping in a single bound, are done practically. This is a wonderful introduction to the Man of Steel, where Kirk Alyn's were more action-packed. George Reeves had an allegory, a message here about hate. And he pretty much set up the core fundamentals of Superman that we've seen from the comics. He brought that onto film for Christopher Reeve and others to follow. I love this, seeing these mutated mole men, so to speak, arrive, and seeing them met with fear and hysteria from the local mob and local people, and having Lois and Clark investigated, having Superman intervene. This is such a great film from 1951, an underrated one at that tackles many of the current issues that Superman still tackles to this day. For people who like to complain about Superman not being this or that or what he stands for, he's always stood for what he's already stood for. Truth, justice, the American way, a better tomorrow, all that stuff since day one. And you've seen it all the way back in the 50s. And ultimately to the ending of like humanity not being ready for it, which is a similar theme we get to see with Superman himself decades later. Next up would be Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. This film I actually enjoy more than Superman 3 and some of the others on this list, but it's a bit low budget, it's a bit silly. The pros, I love seeing Gene Hackman back as Lex Luthor. It's a breath of fresh air. We get future Lex, his nephew, Lenny, played by John Cryer. Christopher Reeve is at his best here, and it's a great story about Superman trying to get rid of nuclear weapons. You have that famous UN speech there. That is such a Superman moment with the kids following him and everything. Lois has a bigger role. We get to see the Daily Planet bought out, and we get to see like true journalism squander at the beginnings of it by these conglomerates, these global companies who want just sensationalism. They don't want to report the truth or news. We get to see that now in social media with certain misinformation and the weaponization of the truth. I love seeing the precursors to that here. The whole love triangle, that date scene is so iconic. You get Nuclear Man. It's funny seeing how that's explored in a later film. Outside of that, Canon Films went through a lot. They went bankrupt, the budget went down, and it's sad because you can see this is trying to strive back to Superman 1 and 2. And while it falls short and it has flaws visual effects wise, it's a strong story, and Christopher Reeve, as always, is Superman. He was Superman, and he gives his all in this. I wish he had one more film, but this is not a bad way to end it out. Who could forget that fight on the moon, and him selling the farm? Another thing that knocks this film down is the unrealistic nature of a person surviving, breathing outer space. Now, I guess one could argue the Silver Age, Superman could like create a shield around him or like the radiation or something, I guess, but it's a bit hokey. It's a bit silly. It's almost like a caricature of what came before. But it is odd how he tells Luthor at the end, see you in 20, and then that's almost when Superman Returns came out, so that's interesting. But overall, it's a bad film, but it's a bad film that's enjoyable, and it's so bad it's good. I have a soft spot for Quest for Peace. It's an entertaining film and a solid ending. Who could forget that speech at the end? The way I see it, it's just one big world. There will be peace when people want it so bad that their governments will have no choice but to give it to them. I love that because it unites the entire world, but also it hints at a bigger intergalactic world in the DC universe. What's actually higher on my list this time is Superman 3. Superman 3 is a flawed film, much like Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, but it kind of leans more into the silliness that Richard Lester added in Superman 2. You know, he was very hokey, he was very slapstick. But what saves this film, besides the better effects, are two things. Richard Pryor, who could forget him in this film, and the synthetic kryptonite evil Superman junkyard fight. Those two things salvage this film. There's behind the scenes issues, so Margot Kidder had a very limited role as Lois Lane here. You also have Annette O'Toole, Martha Kent from Smallville, as Lana Lang, and I kind of like seeing Clark move away from Metropolis and go back and explore his roots in Smallville. Clark always had a thing for her, but it wasn't like Smallville where they're full on dating. It was his friend. You know, he always wanted to make a move, but Brad was there and all that stuff. You got to see a little bit of that in the beginning of Superman the movie. But I like seeing her as a single mother here. And then Richard Pryor is hilarious. You know, he just comes across as a hacker just trying to find a job, and he ends up stealing money from his employer, which is Robert Vaughn, who's almost like Lex Luthor in this. I guess he's kind of like Maxwell Lord / Lex Luthor, but he's pretty much like doing Lex Luthor without it being Lex Luthor. But then to have a distraction for Superman, so they make synthetic kryptonite, but it basically works like red kryptonite. And you get to see Superman turn evil. It's weird how Superman set the precedent for superhero films as far as the second one dealing with identity, doing what you want versus what's actually needed. And then 3 kind of pulled a Spider-Man 3 by having him as his own worst enemy. He turns bad. I love that scene with the bar with him flicking the peanuts. You got to see that recreated in Supergirl. But that junkyard fight is great. I can give as good as I get. I was like, oh yeah? Come on, kid. Come on. He's like fighting. I love that. Some of the transparent effects are a little dated and kind of noticeable by now, but I love that fight all the way to the shirt reveal. And then the last fight with the supercomputer. Originally supposed to be Brainiac, but it was still kind of scary seeing like Robert Vaughn's henchwoman turn into a machine and them having to stop it. That's such a crazy fight. Overall, this does have a lot more humor, but even though I didn't enjoy this one as much as the first two, and I kind of enjoy parts of 4 more, this one is still underrated. I have a deeper appreciation for it now that I'm older. Superman 3, while it has its flaws, still has its moments. Next up would be Superman 2025. This film, I absolutely love the first part of it. The opening. Everything with Lois, Clark, the Daily Planet, Superman at the beginning, I adored. It's when the Justice Gang comes along. I'm not very fond of them, with the exception of Mr. Terrific. Mr. Terrific is a standout on this. He was so much better than the Arrowverse version. I love seeing the T-spheres. This film, some of it is my cup of tea and some of it is very much not my cup of tea, with the humor, the writing, the need for world building. I feel like that was some of the needle drops, and the way the cinematography and visual effects look, kind of like The Flash, knocked this down a couple of points, as well as the changes to lore and the characteristics of certain characters. That's what knocks this film down. But none of the negatives include David Corenswet. This man is awesome. He's more vulnerable than, say, Tyler Hoechlin or Henry Cavill's interpretations, but he has the aura that Christopher Reeve and Brandon Routh had. And he's also a graduate of Juilliard, like Christopher Reeve. Yeah, something about him just had the aura of Christopher Reeve, and there's parts where I just had like a smile, like, wow. He embodied Superman, and this kind of is a throwback to the Silver Age. He had more hokey stuff, you know. There's a kaiju, there's mutant monkeys that post super shit on social media, but I like seeing Metamorpho, and I also enjoy seeing Christopher Reeve's son Will Reeve have a cameo, and who could forget the little nod to Big Belly Burger. The beginning was really good, and how they had the Fortress of Superman robots, although instead of Gary, it would have been cool if you named him Keelix. I didn't care for Guy Gardner and his bowl cut, the jacket, I don't know. The costumes look so cheap, like biker jackets. I mean, it takes me back to the Smallville Justice League days. It really does. Hawkgirl just got on my nerves with the screeches. It's a far cry from what we saw in the cartoons. The Kents I thought they were kind of down to earth. It was a different approach. They were older, but one thing I loved is that both Jonathan and Martha were alive, like in the 90s comics and the Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman show. That's one aspect I like. The scene with Jonathan and Clark is so damn good. It really is. I love that scene. I have a problem with Jor-El and the whole message there, and I don't want to hear anybody talk about, like, accuracy and faithfulness to the comic or property damage after this film. Seriously. Which I never had a problem with the previous ones, but it's just funny how some people complain about something when it's out, but when another person does the same thing, they praise it. It's just kind of funny to me. But when you look at it, all the Supermans are more similar than they are different. I love seeing the elements reused from BVS, Quest for Peace, and Superman Returns. It's very derivative of those while putting its own kind of James Gunn spin on it. Nicholas Hoult is fantastic as Lex Luthor. That's one thing I absolutely love. He's the best Lex Luthor we've had in a long time. I do like the older Lex Luthors. There's something about the younger ones with Eisenberg and Nicholas Hoult that feel kind of like a caricature, or that they're not as menacing or intimidating as they should be. Rachel Brosnahan was great as Lois Lane, and then, Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy Olsen in this film was the best Jimmy Olsen we had since Smallville and the Tim Daly Show. I love Jimmy Olsen in this. He was a standout. I wanted to see more Clark in the Daily Planet. I think once they got to the world building stuff, I could care less. I just want a solo Superman. But I like the allegory they have for Boravia, whether it be Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine. You get to see it there. There are certain moments where I wanted Superman to save the day, be heroic. He does get his ass kicked a lot, but I have to say, he can also dish it out and hold his own. And some of the fighting is really awesome. Seeing Superman do the laser stuff, how he grabbed the engineer and is like knocking her against Ultraman. That was awesome. Krypto was so cute. He reminded me of Mr. Benny, but by the end of the film, I was kind of getting annoyed by him. And they kind of just had him as like not being trained or smart, which I'm not used to that from the comics. And Titans even had a more intelligent Krypto. The needle drops didn't work for me, and some of the humor did not work for me, but I did enjoy the music. I wish John Murphy stayed and did the entire score. The flight sequences are cool. Overall, I went into this not really knowing if I would like it. It wasn't my cup of tea from the trailer, but I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. That being said, its flaws knock it down a couple of points, because without those flaws or without the Justice Gang, it would have been up there with the first two movies for me. Like, hands down. I was ready to give it a 5 out of 5, so it's more like a 3 out of 5 to 2.5 now. And Supergirl, I know she's supposed to be drunk on the Red Sun and deal with trauma in Woman of Tomorrow. They could still have done that without her acting like a sorority girl. Of like, later, bitch. And the Superman not really telling her anything. I don't know. It's just not my cup of tea. I think I've aged out of it. But I did enjoy this, and David Corenswet in years to come, if he continues this way, is going to be the top 5 Superman easily. And this film may actually go up on repeated viewings. This is how I feel immediately seeing this. It's just not entirely my cup of tea, but it's not the worst thing ever. It's not entirely the best thing ever. I feel like it's just right in the middle. It's just Superman. Next would be Superman Returns. Superman Returns kind of suffers from being a slow, boring film, and in many ways, I guess when you watch all the Supermans, it's like watching Star Trek the motion picture when you watch all the Star Treks, but has like a good story. Kevin Spacey is awesome as Lex Luthor. He could have been utilized much more. Brendan Routh, superb successor to Christopher Reeve, because this actually continued the Christopher Reeve films. It was a legacy sequel before legacy sequels and reboots were ever a thing. Bryan Singer left X-Men. I kind of wish he did X-Men 3 instead of this, but overall, I actually enjoyed this more slow-paced film. This was a love letter to the Donner films. You could tell there is every ounce of love. It was kind of a weird mix of modern day, but then kind of like 40s golden age, like Superman in a way. But it was interesting, the story of like Superman leaving, thinking he found remnants of Krypton, coming back, and the world changing 5 years later. Kate Bosworth is great as Lois. I just wish they would have had a chance to have the Lois and Clark dynamic. You have James Marsden as Richard, again the third wheel like he is in The Notebook. And Frank Langella as Perry White. You have Sam Huntington as Jimmy Olsen, and then who could forget Parker Posey as Cat. Kind of like Lex Luthor's Tessmacher or like Mercy, in the animated series. You're not a god, Lex. Gods are selfish beings who fly around in little red capes and don't share their power with mankind. It's like, you like what I done with the place? It's like, all I see is an old man's sick joke. I love seeing Marlon Brando back. The music is utilized correctly. It's one thing is like I love the music in the new Superman, but it just used a couple of notes and that was it. And this actually has like an opening credits and everything of the John Williams theme. John Ottman knew when to go all out on the theme. And despite being slow, it does have memorable moments. Who could forget the plane scene? That is an awesome scene. Superman returning and catching a plane in a baseball stadium. I mean, that's as Americana as you can get. The ending scene where he lifts a kryptonite continent. The sun scene, I love that. The recreation of the Lois spend the night with Superman scene, I love that scene because she wrote an article saying why the world doesn't need Superman, and he like talks to her, and then one of my favorite Superman quotes ever is just like, you said the world doesn't need a Superman? Well, every day I hear people crying out for one. Who could forget the bullet in the eye? This film had its moments, and it's a shame we never got Man of Steel with Brandon Routh fighting Brainiac. Seems like every time they're about to fight Brainiac, they cancel the film or reboot. And then the revelation that Superman had a kid. Even though he is a bastard father that kind of knocked it down in retrospect, but it's just a great love letter to the Donner films. And yeah, I think it's underrated. It's not everybody's cup of tea. I have this higher than most people, but I love it. After that would be Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. This, of course, is the Ultimate Edition. This film gets a lot of hate, but I always love what this film did. It's a darker, more realistic approach. And it's not necessarily nihilistic or injustice either, even though the future visions do kind of have homages to injustice. This was basically like, what if Superman actually existed in our real world in the 21st century? How would we treat him? Look at how we treat fellow Americans. Look at how we've been treating immigrants. Is it really that hard to believe that we would treat a man with godlike powers like this? I think that was a tough peel for most people to digest, to be honest. I love Ben Affleck as this more cynical Batman who's been fighting crime for 20 years. He's on the deep end. And in many ways, Superman saves Wonder Woman and Batman here. And the reason why this is a little bit higher is I actually prefer Batman and Wonder Woman over the Justice King. I just do. But this is a very different, divisive film. Not only with the writing and direction, but also pitting us in the real world versus a kind of more fantastical metropolis, you know? And it's much darker than Man of Steel. I love the nod with the alias of Jimmy Olsen, the CIA agent, how Superman stops the bomb from going off. But then Lex Luthor being a puppet master. Jesse Eisenberg is a little bit like Willy Wonka on crack, a little bit more like an Edward Nygma, but on paper, without the performance, he does appear as Lex Luthor. And to me, he always appeared more as a mad scientist Lex. You know, before Gene Hackman reinvented Lex and then made him more of like a businessman type, he feels more like the mad scientist Lex, who's just into experiments and stuff, even down to the hair. And in many ways, I kind of wonder if he was like the son of Lex, because he says the father put the Lex in LexCorp. He reminded me a little bit of the 90s, where they had the long hair, like in the Death of Superman arc. He reminded me a lot of that Lex Luthor. I loved how his theme was Henry Cavill's Superman theme, but backwards. And then starting off with not only the death of the Waynes, but seeing Bruce Wayne's perspective of the Black Zero event. That was just insane. And his whole vendetta against Superman, seeing him as someone that must be stopped. He lost Robin before. He's fighting crime. He's becoming more destructive. And he's putting all his energy on Superman. And we get to see Jeremy Irons' Alfred deal with Batman's like falling from grace of like, so falls the house of Wayne. It's like, you're going to go to war? Like, he's not our enemy. Ben Affleck was so good in this. And the Ultimate Edition is the way to watch it, because the theatrical is like Batman. He's kind of a bad guy, but it's more his film. They cut a lot of the Clark Kent stuff. In the Ultimate Edition, the original version, we get to see Clark Kent as a journalist, explore the people of Gotham City, do what he does best. I love the relationship with him and Lois Lane. Lois Lane gets to do some investigative journalist with a bullet, you know? And I love seeing all these pieces come together over time, and Lex Luthor being the main orchestrator. Who could forget the Capitol bombing scene? That was nuts, with a lead wheelchair. Lex setting up this stuff to like frame Superman, that he burned all these civilians when it never happened. How he turned Batman and Superman against one another when he knew their secret identities. And all the way down to the fight, reminiscent of Dark Knight Returns. I love the music here. Hans Zimmer did it again after reinventing the Batman theme in the Dark Knight trilogy. He comes back here. And this is a different film. I love all the elements of it, all the way down to the fight. It could have just been their ideologies, but I love the action here. And then I feel like the Martha scene is misunderstood, because it's not that like, hey, we have the same mother's name, let's stop fighting. Which deep down, I kind of wonder if Clark Kent knew about like Bruce's mom being named Martha, and he just said that to kind of mess with him. But deep down, that scene was really about Batman becoming Joe Chill at that moment. He thought Superman was like this alien. At that moment, he realized he had a mother. He was a person. He was a human in a way. But then Batman realized he's about to take this life. And he was no different than the man who murdered his parents. And that was a true breakthrough that at least I saw in that scene. I know it's heavily criticized, but that's what I saw in the film. And that's what changed Batman's mind, is like, Martha won't die tonight. And that warehouse scene is straight up from like an Arkham game. I love the scene where Superman confronts Lex. You've lost. And he's like, I don't know how to lose. And he's like, you'll learn. I just love that. Saves Lex's life, and he fights Doomsday, a version of Doomsday that's from Zod's body. That's crazy with the statue. The parallels between Jor-El's death and Superman's death. But then before that, there's a lot of other nods to Dark Knight Returns with a nuke. And who could forget Wonder Woman's wonderful introduction? Seeing the Trinity was just so epic. And that's one thing I kind of miss about these films, is that they're so epic. And we get the Doomsday fight, Superman finding his place in the world after confronting his identity and the need for a Superman. He figures it out and dies. And then we have a little bit of a cliffhanger for Justice League. And the two things I love here is like seeing Superman he's just a guy trying to do the right thing. He's always has been. But much like the new film, this one also explored what happens when Superman acts unilaterally and people, or should I say governments, are not okay with that. What happens then? I love that montage of him saving people. The Dia de los Muertos scene, the ending with the funerals, totally like World Without Superman, but I love that little statue area. It was like, if you seek his monument, look around you. And that's something that I think we can all do as individuals, as fans of Superman. I see so many fans of different eras be toxic to one another, yet they idolize this hero and talk about hope and optimism, but they're never filled with hope and optimism. They're negative, nasty, toxic people on every side. And I think everybody could learn a thing or two from the hero they worship. Everybody can be a little bit more like Superman. Next up is Zack Snyder's Justice League. This is probably the most quintessential DC Comics film. I love this. It's like Justice League and Justice League Unlimited with a bit more of an epic, more mature turn. It's funny because everybody's like, this is just like the cartoons, and I'm like, are you getting the DCAU confused with the Bruce Timm stuff? Because to me, this felt like when Tim Daly or George Newbern fought Darkseid and all that stuff with the New Gods. That's what this is totally like on a more mature kind of graphic novel level. I love the opening of this with the death of Superman waking up the mother boxes and seeing all the Justice League members' stories come together, so to speak. Steppenwolf is much more of a badass in this version. I love Steppenwolf. The great thing about this film is that Superman's not in it very much, but it's the most Superman film, and it's up there with Man of Steel for me, where they realize they need a Superman. You get some cool visions of an alternate future where he is evil. Even Kilowog, poor Kilowog in the Halls of Justice there. I love seeing the heroes come together and resurrecting Superman. There's a lot of fun stuff there, but when he's brought back, it's filled with such emotion of reuniting with Lois, seeing that she accepted his marriage proposal, being reunited with his mother. That whole scene and the way it was shot was totally reminiscent of the Donner films with Smallville. Mark McClure's cameo as the police officer. That's right, Jimmy Olsen from the original Superman films. And then him coming back in the black and silver suit like in the Return of Superman arc. I love it. How it parallels Man of Steel, the Christ kind of like iconography there. Such an awesome moment with the sun. The whole third act of this with the fight against Steppenwolf, Superman showing up, not impressed. Him being just powerful and just awesome. I mean, there's sequences and shots that are like a pure splash page of a comic book. All the way to Darkseid. The first time we see Darkseid on film. This film is a modern epic. And it's a shame that we never got to see it concluded the way it was meant to be, but I'm thankful for the Henry Cavill run, for what they're able to do and convey with the time given, and showing us stuff that we never saw in Superman films before. That ending is iconic. You also have Martian Manhunter. The Age of Heroes arrived, and it was nice to know that in the end, everyone did join Kal in the sun. After that, at number 3 would be Man of Steel. Oh my god, this is such an epic movie. It's an action-packed movie. We never saw Superman this powerful and like punching and fighting like in this way. The closest would be like Superman 2. In many ways, it's like a 21st century version of Superman 2. I went to go see this film 8 times in theaters. Saw it in 3D the first time. I think Dark Knight Rises and Man of Steel were tied for 8 times. I love both films. Man of Steel, that opening on Krypton is worth it alone, with Russell Crowe as Jor-El, General Zod, Michael Shannon, I will find him! And then you get Superman's origin, but it's not told in a linear order. It's like Batman Begins. You can definitely tell David S. Goyer and Christopher Nolan's involvement of making a more grounded 21st century Superman. This is a first contact story. Imagine Independence Day meets Superman, and that's what you get with Man of Steel. It was nice seeing Amy Adams as Lois here, and then Clark, and knowing Clark, her knowing Superman before he's ever at the Daily Planet is a nice twist, and I'm glad that they added that in the new one where Lois already knows about Clark. Lawrence Fishburne is great as Perry White. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention Wendell Pierce I loved in the new film as well. You also get Lombard, Jenny Olsen in this. Zod and Fiora are great. I love the Kryptonians, the Smallville fight. You think you can threaten my mother? The inspirational speech where he gets his suit in the first flight is just breathtaking. And then we get the final battle. And it's crazy seeing Zod with the World Machine, the Black Zero event, and the casualties it takes. That scene with Jenny and Perry White is so emotional, and then Superman in the beam. And he stops the world engine, and then ultimately fighting Zod. Krypton had its chance. And you get an awesome fight. I do love that moment with him and Lois. Is like, you know, they say it's downhill after the first kiss, and it's like, I'm pretty sure that only counts if you're human. This scene has some humor. I love the ending too with Calvin Harris, where he's like, are you effing stupid? And he destroyed the satellite, and it's just like, how do you know you have America's best interests? And he's just like, I was raised in Kansas, General. I'm about as American as it gets. I love that stuff, but the fight was crazy, seeing how much Zod lost, and that was something out of a comic book or a cartoon, and it was just insane. The Easter eggs to the casino that's tied to Energang and Darkseid, seeing Wayne Enterprises satellite. Oh man, all the way to the end. That was such a perfect ending. Welcome to the planet, and then Clark there. The only part I call bullshit on is Jonathan dying in the tornado, but I understand that he was trying to protect his son because he knew the world wasn't ready. We saw what he went through in BVS. This film has so many great moments with the Kents. Martha coming to Clark's defense as his super hearing's kicking in. Jonathan telling Clark the truth about his alien heritage, and you have that scene where Clark's like, can I just keep pretending I'm your son? And he's like, you are my son. So many motivational, hopeful moments with the Kent family. This film I rewatch time and time again, and I think it's just like the most epic modern Superman. Where Superman 2025 is epic in a comic book sense, this is epic in a grounded sense. Both did wonderful jobs of introducing Superman to a new age. And to me, this is just my Superman right here, outside of Smallville. Next up is Superman 2. Now, I usually have the Richard Lester cut lower, but I'm going to count Richard Donner and Lester, both versions. Both have differences. You know, they have the magic kiss. You have different jokes. His identity is revealed in a different way. I love the opening scene in Paris, and I also love, like, would you care to step outside, where in the Donner cut it's like, have you ever heard of freedom of the press? I love both versions. Both have the bully. The Donner cut decided to use its original ending with turning time back. I grew up on Superman 2 Lester cut, and I enjoyed it until I saw the Donner cut. And the Donner cut, let me tell you, is just awesome. And I wish Zack Snyder luckily had the luxury of having his complete version when it was like released, you know? Richard Donner, they had to kind of compile pieces decades later and do as close as what's possible to getting a Richard Donner cut. But I love everything about it, even with its flaws, even with the use of screen tests. The opening is iconic. It really feels, with the Richard Donner cut, Superman 1 and 2 really do feel like one movie. You know, they filmed them at the same time. They wrote as one script and then split it in half. It feels like one movie when you watch them. Terrence Stamp as General Zod is menacing. Kneel before Zod! Which, if they ever have Zod again, I want him to say that. Who could forget Ursa? Nam. In the Donner cut, he doesn't make those funny noises. The Lester cut is like, like he makes those funny noises. He's more menacing in the Donner cut. Even like General Zod using an M16 on soldiers in the White House attack was crazy in the Donner cut. More of the Lois and Clark romance. I love the screen test used where Lois shoots Clark, and he's like, you realize if you're wrong, Clark Kent would have been dead. And she's like with a blank, and she tricks Superman because earlier in the film, she figured out his identity after the events of the first film. I love that with Margot Kidder as Lois. There's a lot of curves here. Marlon Brando is in the Donner cut. There's emotional scenes with his father when he has to get his powers back. And the fight on both versions is iconic. And yeah, he depowered 3 Kryptonians, crushed Zod's hand and pushed him. And he destroys the fortress and then turns back time. It kind of doesn't make sense timeline-wise when they do that in the new cut, but both versions are a great sequel, and they set a precedent of what was to follow. When you look at Wonder Woman 84, you look at Spider-Man 2, you look at sequels, it's always about like what the hero wants versus what's needed. And Superman 2 is a template for every superhero comic book sequel. After that, at my number 1 is Superman the movie. This is a film when I was a kid I thought was boring. I absolutely adore it. Same thing with the original 77 Star Wars. John Williams score. Who could forget the origin. I mean, this is like the proto-origin film. Even the way the casting is done, with Christopher Reeve being a lesser-known actor, bigger actors in supporting roles. Christopher Nolan followed this template in Batman Begins. Kevin Feige follows this template in this movie with the Marvel films. This film is the ultimate superhero film. And while I think Batman 89 set up the modern blockbuster as far as superhero films go, this showed us the legitimacy of taking a comic book character seriously. Verisimilitude was used by Donner. And you believe in this reality. It's not only fantastical, but it's like, what if a man could fly? You could believe a man could fly, and I did. The effects are dated. Some of the humor is a little bit dated, but it's still a strong film. And to this day, it's my favorite Superman film. Who could forget Otis? Gene Hackman as Lex. Is that how a warped brain of yours gets kicks? By planning the deaths of millions of innocent people? No, by causing the deaths of millions of innocent people. Like, his Lex was cold-blooded, but he was mind over muscle. He was the first one, even though he had a real estate scam, he was the first one to introduce more of like the businessman Lex. We got to see more of the mad scientist in Quest for Peace, but this is what you see later in the John Byrne era. They continued from here. Michael Rosenbaum's, it all derived from Gene Hackman here. Christopher Reeve is and was Superman. I mean, gosh. This first film, Marlon Brando at the beginning, Glenn Ford as Jonathan Kent. Such an emotional scene there. I do know one thing, son, is that you are here for a reason. I don't know whose reason, what's reason, but you are here for a reason. It's not to score touchdowns. That is such a sad scene there. The first flight scene where he has the theme and he flies towards the camera. The technology used, all practical. Margot Kidder. The interview scene is just so great. I'm going to stand for truth, justice, and the American way. And she's like, you're going to end up getting in a fight with every elected official in this country. Miss Taskmacher. I love that. All the way down to Lex's plan and him having to stop the 2 nuclear missiles, succeeding and then losing Lois. That one scene where he goes rage mode. And he's like flying. Oh my God, it's so iconic. I love that moment. It's forbidden. And then you just hear the flashback with all those powers, and I couldn't even save him. He turns back time. When I was younger, I thought he moved like the magnetic pole, but that's impossible. But I guess now it'd be like what the Flash did in Justice League, going back in time. That was a nice nod to Superman as well in Justice League. And then it's the ending where he arrests Luthor, and he's just like, thank you, Superman. It's just like, don't thank me, sir. We're all on the same team. And you get that iconic ending, him flying outside the Earth, and then that smile, winking at the camera. This is Superman, the movie. And it's the gold standard for what the Man of Steel, Man of Tomorrow should be. Anyway, those are my favorite Superman films. This isn't greatly different from your list out there. Please be kind and respectful to one another, regardless of what fandom or what Superman is your favorite. I will block nasty behavior from every side. So be respectful. I love the films. I think, to me personally, the TV shows are still stronger than some of the films, like Smallville, Lois and Clark New Adventures, Superman and Lois, the Tim Daly animated show. I think those are the stronger versions, but they also have more time to explore the characters. But what I love is that each Superman has been of its time, and they each adapt and explore a different era of comics in each one. And I can't wait to see how the Man of Steel gets reinvented in the future and what happens. Share your favorites down in the comments below. Stand for truth, justice, the American way, and a better tomorrow. Stay safe and healthy, everyone. Goodbye.